The US presidential election is now days away. And while one would expect the political rhetoric to get shriller, Trump has taken things to a whole new level with his invective against immigrants. The former US president is unapologetically tying his bid to win a second White House term to the strong anti-immigrant sentiment prevalent in the country. However, his tirade and that of his supporters is not confined to simply opposing illegal immigration. It's now an unabashed, bitter, racist, xenophobic outburst aimed at instilling a strong anti-immigrant fear in Americans. While addressing a massive rally at New York's Madison Square Garden, Trump doubled down on his promise for a massive deportation program on day one of his new term to reverse what he described as an immigrant invasion into the US. Even as his campaign team and his allies defend him against his Democratic opponent, Kamala Harris, calling him an unhinged, unstable fascist and a wannabe tyrant who admires Hitler, Trump's Sunday rant, analysts say, qualifies as possibly the most vitriolic campaign speech in modern US history. Trump said the United States is an occupied country. And before the Republican presidential nominee spoke, some of his top supporters hurled extremely racist and vulgar rhetoric. Former congressional candidate David Rem called Kamala Harris the Antichrist and the devil, while others lashed out at Hillary Clinton's illegals and homeless people. Comedian Tony Hinchcliffe called Puerto Rico a floating island of garbage. As his opponents turned up the heat, the Trump campaign later disavowed this line, claiming this joke does not reflect the views of President Trump or the campaign. Much of Trump's speech was peppered with falsehoods and exaggerations. It was the kind of rhetoric that the Harris campaign believes could prompt moderate voters, fence-sitters and disaffected Republicans to Harris. But is this a huge risky gamble by Trump? Analysts argue this rhetoric could very well scare away a significant segment of the Trump support base that otherwise agrees with his brand of hardline politics. Some American analysts have gone as far as to say that Trump's blistering anti-migrant rhetoric is the most extreme form of ever witnessed in American history. Trump also took sharp jibes at the Biden-Harris administration on the issue of the economy. Tapping into the frustration of many Americans who are struggling with high grocery prices despite cooling inflation, Trump said, "I'd like to begin by asking a very simple question. Are you better off now than you were 4 days ago? I'm here today with a message of hope for all Americans. With your vote in this election, I will end inflation. I will stop the invasion of criminals coming into our country, and I will bring back the American dream." He also said he would push for a tax credit for family caregivers who take care of a parent or a loved one. This comes after Kamala Harris unveiled her own platform proposing that Medicare should cover home health care. Trump said, "If Kamala Harris gets 4 more years, our economy can never recover. If I win, we will quickly build the greatest economy in the history of the world." The former president rooted his first presidential campaign in 2016 on inflammatory rhetoric about Mexican migrants. Now he's suggesting that migrants are directly to blame for Americans' economic frustrations, an argument often used by far-right leaders throughout history. While Trump's rant sounded quite ominous, it was the opening acts of the New York City rally, a mix of donors, entertainers and MAGA politicians who unleashed an 11th-hour campaign furor that prompted angry rebukes from Democrats and some Republicans as well, who are now worried that the vengeful show would hurt their standing with moderate voters. The rally began with Tony Hinchcliffe, a comedian and podcast host, assailing Puerto Rico in a city that's home to the largest Puerto Rican population on the US mainland. About 500,000 Puerto Ricans also live in battleground Pennsylvania, where Kamala Harris campaigned on Sunday. The comedian said, and I quote, "There's a lot going on. I don't know if you know this, but there is literally a floating island of garbage in the middle of the ocean right now. I think it's called Puerto Rico." The line was well received by Trump supporters who filled the historic arena in Midtown Manhattan. Trump has recently taken to calling the US a garbage can for the world when he rails against undocumented immigrants. Hinchcliffe went on to say, "These Latinos, they love making babies too. We just know that they do." Harris's campaign seized on these comments, quickly clipping the video and posting it on social media. The vice president then visited a Puerto Rican restaurant in North Philadelphia where she discussed her vision for the island, along with plans to lower costs and create opportunity in Puerto Rican communities on the mainland. Republican Senator Rick Scott of Florida, whose re-election campaign depends on sizable support from the state's Puerto Rican community, joined the backlash, saying it's not funny and it's not true. Puerto Ricans are amazing people and amazing Americans. Another Florida Republican, Representative Carlos Gimenez, a close ally of Trump's, blasted the remarks, saying this is not a joke, it's completely classless and in poor taste. Tony Hinchcliffe clearly isn't funny. Definitely doesn't reflect my values or those of the Republican Party, he said. New York GOP Representative Anthony Despacito, who's facing a competitive re-election, also responded by saying, I'm proud to be Puerto Rican. The only thing that's garbage was a bad comedy set. Stay on message. Meanwhile, Trump, who was introduced by former First Lady Melania Trump in her first speaking role at a rally this election cycle, largely stuck to the script, including his now common assertion that his political rivals represent a traitorous enemy within. We're running against a massive, crooked, malicious leftist machine that's running the Democrat Party. They're smart and vicious, they're the enemy within, and we must defeat them, Trump thundered. Another speaker, radio host Sid Rosenberg, attacked Hillary Clinton, the Democratic nominee from 8 years ago, by hurling vicious abuses at her in words that we cannot repeat on this show. Rosenberg then turned his attention to migrants now living in New York City and his fury over the local government's attempts to feed and house them. He said, you've got homeless and veterans sleeping on their own feces on a bench in Central Park. And then he went on to hurl more cuss words. There are around 36 million Hispanic voters eligible to vote in the American election this year, according to the Pew Research Center. They have generally formed a key plank of the Democratic coalition, but Republicans have been eating into that support. Could this nasty invective by Trump and his supporters change that? Meanwhile, Elon Musk, who's openly supporting Trump and also raising funds for him, has refuted claims that he worked illegally in the United States in the 1990s, following a report by the Washington Post suggesting that he lacked the required legal status to establish the company that made him a millionaire. The report was picked up by President Joe Biden during a campaign in Pittsburgh. He slammed Musk for hypocrisy, stating that wealthiest man in the world turned out to be an illegal worker here. No, I'm serious. He was supposed to be in school when he came on a student visa. He wasn't in school though. He was violating the law. And he is talking about all those illegals coming our way. Musk hit back, saying the Biden puppet is lying. Moving away from the shrill rhetoric of the campaign, a new survey has suggested that 61% of Indian Americans will vote for Kamala Harris, while 31% will support Donald Trump. According to the Indian American Attitude Survey 2024, conducted by Carnegie Endowment for International Peace in partnership with YouGov, there's also worrying news for Democrats. There's a dip in the Desi community's support for the Democratic presidential candidate compared to 2020, when 68% of Indian Americans backed Joe Biden, and an increase in the support for Trump from 22% 4 years ago has now gone up to 31%. There is a dip in the number of Indian Americans who identify as Democrats from 56% to 47%, and those who lean Democrat from 66% to 57%.